Welcome to this week's book talk. My name's Stephanie. I'm one of the reference librarians at the Blue Island Public Library. I'll just be going over a few of the books that I have here on hand. These are from my personal collection, but they're all ones that we can access in some form or another from the library. And I'll mention in my description of the books what forms they're available at the moment, whether that be a physical book or virtual, and how you can best access them if you wanted to check them out. Now, the first book that I wanted to go over is called Angel Maker. It's by Nick Harkaway. It's a very fun book that's also very difficult to describe without sounding a little bit crazy. So it follows the main character, who is a clockmaker. He lives a very orderly, sedate life, specifically to try to avoid the legacy of his father, who was a famous gangster before he died. And that's going fine for our main character until the day an 80-year-old former super spy decides to bring in a doomsday device for him to fix. The doomsday device is in the form of a mechanical beehive that's very kind of clockwork in nature in its construction, which is why it was brought to him in the first place to repair. And of course, while he's working on it, he does accidentally trigger it, because of course he does. It's a fiction novel. It's gotta happen. So after accidentally triggering the device, he is then forced to try to fend off the various groups that are trying to steal it for their own nefarious purposes, and help the retired super spy tie up some loose ends during her retirement, including the mission she abandoned decades ago that started this whole mess. The tone of the book is gangster noir meets James Bond meets absurdist comedy, and a lot of the fun just comes from watching all of the many separate plot threads come together to actually form a cohesive narrative by the end of the book. I recommend it. It's a little bit long, but it's very engaging, and we have it as both an ebook and a physical book if you wanted to check it out. Now, the next book we've got is called Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. This one's a pretty straightforward retelling of the Norse myths, but it's done in a way that's much more approachable than actually trying to read the original Norse myths. I wouldn't call it a modern retelling because the setting isn't changed at all, but Gaiman has written it in a very modern voice, which makes the stories that much more interesting and easy to engage with. I'd recommend it for anyone who liked the Percy Jackson books, or any kind of other looser retelling of ancient myths, but is looking for something that's less fiction and more myth. We have the physical ebook and e-audiobook versions of this available if you wanted to take a look at it. The next one is called Cinnamon and Gunpowder by Eli Brown. This is a fun, piratey take on the story of Scheherazade. It's set in the 1800s, and it follows a renowned chef, who is here on the cover, who gets kidnapped by an equally infamous pirate, which is her on the cover here. She threatens to kill him unless he is able to create these elaborate 5-star meals for her every Sunday, despite the meager and insufficient food stores on her ship. That's a hard enough task on its own, and things only get worse as it goes along, once it becomes apparent that there's a saboteur aboard her ship, and that the captain is being hunted by a ruthless privateer who has mysterious connections to her past. If you want a bit of romance with your adventure stories, and you don't mind reading something that's going to make you hungry, I recommend checking out our e-audiobook copy of this. Okay, and the last book is The Adventure Zone, Here There Be Gerblins. You might already be familiar with The Adventure Zone. It's a pretty popular Dungeons & Dragons podcast run by a family of comedians. This is actually the first in the series of graphic novel adaptations of that storyline. It's very funny. It's got a charming art style by Carrie Peach, who you might know from some of her other webcomics or projects. And it's great if you're just looking for a light read, and you like watching other people play or bumble through a game of Dungeons and Dragons. The library has a physical copy, but if you don't want to wait for us to reopen, I do suggest checking out the original podcast and then reading the graphic novel after you experience the story that way. Okay, that's it for this week's book talk. Hope you had fun.